Hello, my name is Chris Campbell. I am a translator and a dramaturg. So I started off as an actor, and that was in the UK, and I'd lived in France for quite a long time before that. So I was an actor and I spoke French, but I made no connection between the two things at all. And then one time I was in a play in London with a very famous French actor, and one night after the show, she said to me, "Why don't you translate French plays?" And I thought, yeah, actually, why don't I? So I always say when asked that I translate French plays because Isabelle Huppert told me to, and nobody says no to Isabelle Huppert. I would never have chosen to translate this play myself, because a play in which all the characters have to be played by actors of color. It's about the idea of blackness. So it's not a play I personally would ever have thought I was appropriate to translate. So about 18 months ago, I was phoned by an African-American producer from New York who said, bear in mind, this is all happening on the telephone. So I'm sitting in London and this voice from New York is saying, we're going to do this new production of The Blacks by Jean Genet, and you've been recommended as a translator and we've read your stuff, and would you be interested in doing it? And I thought, there is one question I simply have to ask before this conversation goes any further. So I said, I just need to check that you're aware that I am not myself a person of color. And the producer said, well, neither was Jean Genet, which I thought was an excellent point. And so they specifically wanted a white European translation for African-American actors, director, producer, investors, everything to grab, to take over and make their own. This has been one of the most challenging things I've ever translated. I usually translate contemporary work. In other words, the writer is still alive. And it means that you can talk to the writer for clarity sometimes. You can say, I'm not quite sure what's going on here. Oh, obviously with Genet, I can't do that because he's dead. But more importantly than that, quite a lot of what he writes it's very hard to say exactly what it means. There's a kind of poetry going on. There's a sort of dance of words going on. And to translate that and for it not to sound just like you've got it wrong is really, really challenging. My two favorite lines in the translation, weirdly, are on the same page, one at the top and one at the bottom. There's a bit where one of the characters is they're sort of imagining being white in a poem, what that might feel like. And there's a wonderful bit about the eyes. She evokes the blueness of the eyes, and she talks about various different flowers and waterfalls and just the sky, blueness. And at the end she says, what would the world look like through eyes that look like that? And I love that line, even though those words are my own. But the reason I love it is in French you can't have the look meaning the two different things. So what would the world look like through eyes that look like that? Those two looks in French are two different words, so you don't get that echo, and I really love it. And you lose things when you translate, inevitably, you always do. But I think you have the right to add things elsewhere to make up for the things you lost. And that's just a little poetic grace note that I've been able to add because of the way our languages work. There's a line where I said a lot of this play is poetic and vague, but sometimes it's really, really not. And there are moments when the two come together in a way which I think is just devastating. And one of the men in the play is kind of, again, it's a poem. He's reflecting on the history of black people. And at the end of that speech, he says, I died below deck in the black hold, and I'm still dying. I'm still dying. And I'm so proud to have written those words because it just works. And I don't feel like it was me. It felt like it just came. And as you possibly can tell, I can't actually say it without choking up. And I spoke to the actor who delivered the line, and he said he was the same. There's something about the rhythm of that and the idea that terrible, evil voyage hasn't finished. It's kind of like an ideal community, this. You know, if you live in a small town, you go around thinking, there's got to be someone else here who shares my interest in theatre, for example. But here it's everyone, from, absolutely everyone, from the artistic director to people in the kitchen, van drivers, everyone you meet is interested in theatre. This is a very niche reference, but if you've ever been to Wales, it's a bit like rugby in Wales. You don't have to think, I wonder if they're interested. They are. And it's the same here. And I'm going to miss that. when I go home and start to talk randomly to people at theatre and their eyes glaze over and they wander off, I shall often think back to this perfect theatrical township. What it's given us is the opportunity to work for a week and then to have 2 readings with a caliber of actor who you simply could not normally attract to a development reading. I mean, that if it was up to me, I would cast every single one of them in the production, and that's not normally the case with a development reading. So it gives you that, it carves out a privileged time and space to do work that you so often wish you could do, but it's just not possible. You can't get people together. Maybe at this stage you don't have the money to pay actors like that for a week, whatever it may be. But yeah, that kind of, again, it's got that sense that there's real life, and then there's the O'Neill, where all these things that you always wish were possible suddenly are possible. When this play was written, there were very few plays focusing on black characters explicitly. We live in a golden age of playwriting for black characters, black writers. They, of course, may not agree, but there are demonstrably more plays dealing with that sort of topic now than there were 20 years ago, 25 years ago. What's different about this is because it comes from another place and another time, it's kind of about the theory of all that stuff. It's kind of like a spectral granddaddy hovering over all the great plays about the black experience there have been in the last few years. So I would like white audiences perhaps to reflect on how the idea of blackness was invented in the white European mind, which it pretty much was. And I would like black audiences to think this was sort of the beginning of a sort of theatrical self-consciousness, which has come to a pretty glorious flowering in our time. So I'd like them to have a rollicking good night out and go away thinking, wow, I've never seen anything quite like that before.